Hello everyone. Before we start, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment with where you're from and what time it is. That way, YouTube will keep pulling you stories like this. Now, let the ocean's darkness take over. Story 1. The Night. Shift cabin steward. I never believed in ghosts until I worked as a cabin steward on the Celestial Dream. That was 3 years ago, and I still wake up in cold sweats thinking about what happened during those 7 nights at sea. I'd been working cruise ships for about 2 years when I got assigned to Deck 7, the infamous deck that other crew members whispered about but never explained why. I was 24, needed the money, and figured superstitious sailors were just trying to scare the new guy. I couldn't have been more wrong. My shift started at midnight and ended at 6 a.m. Perfect timing for someone who preferred the quiet hours when passengers were asleep and the ship felt almost peaceful. The Celestial Dream was a massive vessel, 15 decks, over 3,000 passengers, and enough crew to run a small city. During the day, it was chaos, but at night, it was something else entirely. The first 3 nights went smoothly. I'd clean the hallways, restock towels, handle any late-night requests from passengers. Deck 7 housed premium suites, so the guests were usually older, quieter couples who kept to themselves. The only odd thing I noticed was how cold the hallway always felt, even though the ship's climate control kept everywhere else at a comfortable 72 degrees. It was on the 4th night that I first heard the humming. I was restocking the linen closet around 2:30 a.m. when this soft, melodic humming drifted down the hallway. It sounded like a woman's voice, maybe singing a lullaby. I figured one of the passengers couldn't sleep and was trying to soothe herself. So I continued working quietly, not wanting to disturb anyone. But then I realized something that made my skin crawl. I knew every occupied room on Deck 7. I had the passenger manifest memorized, and according to my records, the humming was coming from cabin 717, which had been empty for the entire cruise. I grabbed my master key and approached the door slowly. The humming grew louder as I got closer, and I could swear I smelled something floral, like old perfume mixed with something else I couldn't quite identify. Something that reminded me of my grandmother's house right before she passed away. I knocked softly. "Housekeeping, is everything all right?" The humming stopped immediately. I waited for a response, but the silence that followed felt heavy, oppressive, like the air itself was holding its breath. I used my keycard and slowly opened the door. The cabin was empty, completely empty. No luggage, no personal items, nothing to indicate anyone had ever been there. The bed was still made with the crisp white sheets we used for unoccupied rooms, but the smell, that floral scent, was stronger now, almost overwhelming, and the temperature. If the hallway was cold, this room was Arctic. I could see my breath forming small clouds as I exhaled. I backed out quickly and locked the door. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe the ocean air was playing tricks on me. I tried to convince myself of a dozen rational explanations as I finished my rounds. The next night, the humming started again. Same time, same cabin, but this time, when I approached the door, I heard something that made my blood freeze. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps, pacing back and forth inside the empty room. I called my supervisor, Marcus, who'd been working cruise ships for over 15 years. When I told him what was happening, his face went pale. "You're working cabin 717, he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yeah, why? What's wrong with 717? Marcus looked around nervously before pulling me into an empty conference room. "Listen, kid, there are some things about this ship that management doesn't like to talk about. 3 years ago, we had a passenger in 717. Margaret Whitmore, 78 years old, traveling alone after her husband died. Sweet lady, always humming these old songs from the 40s. He paused, rubbing his temples like the memory gave him a headache. On the last night of her cruise, Housekeeping found her door locked from the inside. No answer to knocks, no response to the phone. Security had to override the lock. When they got in, she was gone, completely vanished. No trace of her anywhere on the ship. We searched every deck, every room, every possible hiding spot. It was like she just evaporated. Maybe she fell overboard, I suggested, though even as I said it, I knew it didn't explain what I'd been experiencing. Marcus shook his head. The balcony door was locked from the inside too. And here's the thing that really spooked everyone. Her luggage was still there, perfectly organized. Her medications were still in the bathroom. But there was no sign of struggle, no blood, nothing. Just an empty room that smelled like her perfume. What kind of perfume? Something floral? Lilacs, I think. My stomach dropped. That's exactly what I'd been smelling. Since then, Marcus continued, every crew member who's worked that cabin has reported incidents, humming, footsteps, cold spots. Some have even claimed to see her reflection in the bathroom mirror. Management rotates staff frequently now, usually after a few days max. Why didn't anyone tell me this before? Because most people quit the moment they experience anything unusual. You've lasted longer than most. That night, I almost called in sick, but something inside me, maybe curiosity, maybe stupidity, made me show up for my shift. I had to know what was really happening in cabin 717, around 3 a.m. I positioned myself in the hallway directly across from the cabin and waited. For 20 minutes, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the humming began. It was definitely a woman's voice, singing what sounded like Moonlight Serenade, an old Glenn Miller song my grandfather used to play. The melody was crystal clear, hauntingly beautiful, and impossibly sad. I approached the door with my keycard already in hand. The humming continued as I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The room was exactly as I'd left it the night before, empty, pristine, and absolutely freezing. But now I could see my breath, and the humming seemed to be coming from the bathroom. I walked slowly toward the bathroom door, every instinct screaming at me to turn around and run. But I had to see. I had to know. The bathroom was small, typical, cruise ship design. Just a shower, toilet, and sink with a large mirror above it. In the mirror's reflection, I could see the empty bathroom, and something else that made my heart nearly stop. Standing behind me, just over my left shoulder, was the translucent figure of an elderly woman in a pale blue nightgown. She had silver hair styled in the way older women did in the 40s, and she was looking directly at my reflection with the saddest eyes I've ever seen. She raised one transparent hand and pressed it against the mirror from her side, where her palm touched the glass. Frost began to spread outward in delicate, intricate patterns. I spun around, but there was nothing behind me, just the empty bathroom and the sound of my own ragged breathing. When I looked back at the mirror, she was gone, but her handprint remained frozen on the glass, and written in the condensation beneath it were two words that made my soul shiver. Help. Me? I ran. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I ran out of that cabin, down the hallway, and straight to Marcus's quarters. I banged on his door until he answered, and when he saw my face, he didn't ask questions. He just nodded knowingly. You saw her, didn't you? I could only nod. What did she want? Help, I whispered. She wrote help me on the mirror. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, then handed me a cup of coffee with hands that trembled slightly. Here's the thing nobody talks about, he said finally. Margaret Whitmore didn't just disappear. According to the security footage we're not supposed to know about, she was seen entering her cabin on the last night, but she was never seen leaving. So what happened to her? That's just it. Nobody knows. But some of the older crew members think she's still there, trapped somehow. They say the dead can get lost at sea, caught between worlds when they die, with unfinished business. What kind of unfinished business? Her husband. She was traveling to scatter his ashes at a specific location in the Caribbean, a place where they honeymooned 50 years ago. But she died before she could complete her mission. The rest of my shift passed in a blur. I couldn't concentrate on anything except that handprint on the mirror and the desperate sadness in those ghostly eyes. When 6 a.m. finally came, I was more exhausted than I'd ever been in my life. But as I was heading back to my quarters, I made a decision that would change everything. I had to help her. The question was, how do you help a ghost finish what the living couldn't complete? Before we jump into the next story, if you're enjoying these creepy tales, hit that subscribe button. We've got fresh horror chills waiting for you every night. These cruise ship mysteries are just the beginning. Story 2. The Dining Room Manager. My name is Sophia, and I've been managing cruise ship dining operations for 8 years. I've seen food poisoning outbreaks, kitchen fires, and every kind of passenger complaint imaginable. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for what happened aboard the Ocean Majesty during our Mediterranean cruise last summer. I should have known something was wrong when I found the reservation. It was a Tuesday morning, our third day at sea, when I was reviewing the evening's dining reservations for our main restaurant, Le Bernardin. Everything looked normal until I got to table 47, a table that shouldn't exist. Our restaurant has 46 tables. I designed the layout myself. I know every square inch of that space, like I know my own apartment. But there it was, clear as day on my computer screen. Table 47, party of 2, Mr. and Mrs. Richardson, 8:30 p.m. I called down to our IT department, thinking it was a system glitch. Marcus from tech support came up within minutes, took one look at my screen, and went pale. Sophia, there is no table 47 in your system. The table numbers only go up to 46. Then explain this, I said, pointing at my monitor. He stared at the screen for a full minute before shaking his head. I can't. This shouldn't be possible. The reservation system won't even let you enter a table number that doesn't exist. So what do I do about it? Maybe it's just a weird bug. Cancel the reservation and move on. But when I tried to delete it, the system wouldn't let me. Every time I clicked cancel reservation, an error message popped up. Cannot cancel, confirmed. Dining preference for existing passengers. The Richardson reservation remained locked in place for 8:30 that evening. By dinner time, I'd managed to convince myself it was just a technical issue that would resolve itself. The Richardsons probably didn't even exist. And when 8:30 came and went, with no one showing up, the system would automatically clear the ghost reservation. At 8:25, I was standing near the host station, keeping an eye on the evening service, when our hostess, Maria, approached me with a confused expression. Sophia, there's an elderly couple here, asking about their 8:30 reservation. They say they're the Richardsons. My blood went cold. What do they look like? Well, dressed, probably in their 70s. The woman is wearing this beautiful vintage dress, very elegant. The man has on a classic black suit. They seem ... nice. But there's something ... something, what? I don't know how to explain it. They feel ... distant. Like they're here but not really here, if that makes sense. It didn't make sense, but I had to handle it professionally. I walked to the front of the restaurant, where an elderly couple stood waiting patiently by the entrance. Maria was right. They were impeccably dressed in what looked like clothing from the 1950s. The woman wore pearls and had her silver hair styled in perfect victory rolls. The man carried himself with the posture of someone from a different era. Mr. and Mrs. Richardson? I asked with my best hospitality smile. Yes, dear, the woman replied in a soft, cultured voice that seemed to come from far away. We have a reservation for 8:30, of course. Right this way. Here's where things got truly bizarre. I led them toward the back of the restaurant, where our corner tables offered the most privacy. But as we walked, the woman stopped suddenly. Oh no, dear. Table 47, please. We always sit at table 47. I felt my professional composure cracking. I'm sorry, but we don't have a table 47. The couple exchanged a look that seemed to communicate volumes without words. The man spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the same distant quality as his wife's. We reserved table We've been coming to this restaurant for as long as we can remember. The corner table by the window, overlooking the ocean. Surely you haven't moved it. I was about to explain again that no such table existed when I looked toward the corner he was indicating. There, in a space that had been empty wall just moments before, sat a small table for two. It was set with white linens, crystal glasses, and silverware that looked older and more ornate than our usual settings. Candles flickered in small hurricanes, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Of course, I stammered. Table 47, right this way. I led them to the table, my mind reeling. This was impossible. That space had been empty. I'd walked past it hundreds of times. There was no table there. There had never been a table there, but there it was. The Richardsons settled into their seats with the satisfaction of people returning to a familiar, comfortable place. Mrs. Richardson smoothed her vintage dress and smiled at me warmly. We'll have our usual, dear. You know what we like. I didn't know what they liked. I'd never seen these people before in my life. But something made me nod and promise to send their server over shortly. I practically ran back to the host station, where Maria was seating another party. Maria, do you see table 47? She looked toward the corner where the Richardsons were now sitting, studying menus that I was certain I hadn't given them. See what? That's just the corner where we keep the extra chairs. Look again. Really? Look. Maria squinted toward the corner, and for a moment, her expression changed. She blinked hard several times, like she was trying to focus on something just out of reach. There's something there, like a shadow, but I can't quite, ... You can't see the table. What table? I realized with growing horror that I might be the only one who could clearly see what was happening. To me, the Richardsons were sitting at a fully set table, real as any other diners in the restaurant. But to Maria, there was nothing there but empty space and stored furniture. I decided to test something. I walked over to James, one of our most experienced servers, and asked him to take care of the couple in the corner. What couple? He asked, looking directly at the Richardsons. The elderly couple, table 47. James looked confused. Sophia, there's nobody sitting in that corner, and we don't have a table 47. But when I looked back, I could see Mrs. Richardson waving at me, trying to get my attention. She seemed agitated, repeatedly tapping her water glass with her fork in a pattern that sounded almost like Morse code. I approached their table slowly, noticing for the first time how quiet it was around them. The usual dinner conversation and clinking of silverware seemed muffled in their immediate area, as if sound itself was being absorbed by something unseen. Is everything all right? I asked. We've been waiting quite some time for our server, Mr. Richardson said, checking an antique pocket watch. It's nearly 9 o'clock. I glanced at my phone. It was 8:35. 5 minutes had passed since I'd seated them. I'll get someone right over to you, I promised. But how do you serve customers that half your staff can't see? I decided to handle their order myself. When I asked what they'd like, Mrs. Richardson smiled, that distant smile again. The usual, dear. Shrimp cocktail to start, followed by the lobster thermidor. My husband will have the beef Wellington, and we'll share a bottle of the 1947 Chateau Margaux. I knew our wine list by heart. We didn't carry any wine from 1947. Most of our oldest bottles were from the 1990s, but I nodded and headed to the kitchen. Chef, Antonio looked at me like I'd lost my mind when I placed the order. Sophia, we don't serve lobster thermidor. We've never served lobster thermidor. And beef Wellington, that's not on our menu. Just ... make something similar, okay? Lobster tail and filet mignon. Make it look elegant. Antonio shrugged and started cooking, muttering in Italian about crazy managers and impossible requests. While I waited for the food, I decided to do some research. I went to my office and pulled up our passenger manifest, searching for Richardson. Nothing. No one by that name was registered for this cruise. I tried searching our historical records, going back through years of past cruises. Still nothing. Finally, on a hunch, I called our corporate headquarters and asked to speak with someone who might have access to really old records. After being transferred 3 times, I reached Margaret in archives. Richardson, Richardson, ... she muttered, typing on her computer. What ship did you say? Ocean Majesty. That's interesting. We did have an Ocean Majesty in our fleet, but that ship was decommissioned in 1953. My mouth went dry. 1953. Yes, actually, now that I'm looking at this, there was an incident on the last voyage. An elderly couple named Richardson went missing on the final night. Never found. The whole thing was quite mysterious. They were seen at dinner, then simply vanished. What happened to the ship? Scrapped. But you know how these old vessels are. Sometimes parts get salvaged and reused in newer ships. Fixtures, furniture, decorative elements. It's possible some pieces from the original Ocean Majesty ended up on your current vessel. When I hung up the phone, my hands were shaking. I walked back to the restaurant, half hoping the Richardsons would be gone, that this was all some elaborate stress-induced hallucination. But they were still there, sitting patiently at their impossible table, looking exactly the same as when I'd first seen them. The food was ready. I carried the plates out myself, setting them down on the table that shouldn't exist for people who shouldn't be there. This looks lovely, dear, Mrs. Richardson said, cutting into her lobster with movements that seemed strangely familiar, like watching an old movie. Thank you, I replied, though I wasn't sure what I was being thanked for. As they ate, I noticed other strange details. Their food seemed to disappear, but I never actually saw them take bites. Their wine glasses emptied, but I never saw them lift the glasses to their lips. It was like watching a performance where all the actions were implied rather than explicit. Other diners began to leave as the evening wore on, but the Richardsons remained, lingering over dessert they'd never ordered but somehow had. By 10:30, the restaurant was empty except for them and me. We should be going soon, Mr. Richardson said, checking his pocket watch again. Our ship leaves at midnight. Your ship? Yes, dear. We're not staying on this vessel. We're just passing through. Mrs. Richardson reached across the table and touched my hand. Her fingers were ice cold, and for a moment, I felt something that made my soul ache with loneliness and longing. Thank you for seeing us, she whispered. It's been so long since anyone could see us. They stood up slowly, Mr. Richardson helping his wife with her chair in a gesture of old-world courtesy. As they walked toward the exit, their forms seemed to become less solid, more transparent, until they looked like shadows of themselves. At the entrance to the restaurant, Mrs. Richardson turned back one last time. Same time tomorrow, she asked, hopefully. Before I could answer, they were gone. I looked back at the corner where they'd been sitting. The table was gone too, just empty space and stored chairs, exactly as it should be. But on the floor where their table had been, I found a single white rose and an antique dinner receipt dated September 15th, 1953, the final night of the original Ocean Majesty's last voyage. The receipt was for 2 meals, lobster thermidor and beef Wellington, at the bottom. In faded ink, someone had written, "Until we meet again," the next evening, at exactly 8:30. The reservation appeared in my system again, and I was the only one who could see it coming. True, disturbing. Cruise Ship Horror Stories, Chapter 3, Story 3. The Security of Fisarum David Chen. And I've worked maritime security for 12 years. I've dealt with everything from pickpockets to man overboard situations, from drunk passengers to smuggling operations. I thought I'd seen it all, until I was assigned to the night shift aboard the Paradise Voyager. That was 6 months ago, and I still check the security monitors with a sense of dread every time I start my shift. It started with the elevators. The Paradise Voyager has 8 passenger elevators spread across 15 decks. During my rounds, I monitor them constantly through our security system, because elevators on cruise ships can be tricky. People get stuck. Kids press all the buttons. Drunk passengers sometimes get creative. So, when I noticed elevator number 6 was moving at 3:17 a.m. with no one inside, I figured it was just a mechanical issue. I called maintenance and forgot about it. But the next night, it happened again. Same elevator, same time, 3:17 a.m. exactly. The security camera inside showed an empty car moving from deck 4 to deck 12, then back down to deck 2, then up again in a pattern that made no sense. I decided to investigate personally. I positioned myself on deck 7 and waited for elevator 6 to arrive. When the doors opened with their usual cheerful ding, I stepped inside an empty car that smelled faintly of cigarette smoke and something else, something floral and old-fashioned, like the perfume my grandmother used to wear. The elevator had no call buttons pressed, but as soon as I stepped inside, it began to move. Not up or down at first, but side to side, swaying gently, like we were at sea in rough weather. But the ocean was calm that night. Mirror calm. Then the temperature dropped. I could see my breath fogging in the suddenly frigid air as the elevator climbed slowly to deck 12. When the doors opened, I found myself looking at a hallway I'd never seen before. The carpet was different, deep red, instead of our standard blue and gold pattern. The lighting was dimmer, more yellow, like old incandescent bulbs, instead of our modern LED system. And the cabin numbers were wrong. Instead of the 1200 series we should have on deck 12, I was looking at numbers in the 800s. I stepped out cautiously, my hand instinctively moving to my radio. The hallway stretched in both directions, lined with cabin doors that looked older, more ornate than the standardized doors throughout the rest of the ship. Classical music was playing softly from hidden speakers, something with violins and piano that sounded like it belonged in a 1940s ballroom. I tried my radio, static. My cell phone showed no signal, which was impossible. We had full cellular coverage throughout the ship, thanks to our satellite system. I walked slowly down the hallway, noting that many of the cabin doors were slightly ajar, revealing darkened rooms within. As I passed cabin 847, I heard voices coming from inside, a man and a woman having what sounded like an argument, though I couldn't make out the words. I knocked on the door. "Security, is everything all right in there?" The voices stopped immediately, followed by complete silence. I pushed the door open and stepped into a cabin that was decorated in a style I'd never seen on any modern cruise ship. Rich mahogany paneling, brass fixtures, and furniture that looked like genuine antiques rather than our standard contemporary pieces. The bed was made with crisp white linens, and there were personal effects scattered around men's clothing, laid out on a chair, women's jewelry on the dresser, vintage suitcases stacked in the corner, but no people. I was examining what looked like a 1940s camera sitting on the nightstand when I heard footsteps in the hallway behind me. I turned around to see a woman in an elegant evening gown walking past the cabin door. She moved with the grace of someone from another era, her hair styled in victory rolls, her dress swishing as she walked. "Excuse me, ma'am," I called out. Following her into the hallway, she turned to look at me with eyes that seemed to hold depths of sadness I couldn't fathom. When she spoke, her voice had a quality that reminded me of old movie stars, crisp, cultured, with perfect diction. "Have you seen my husband? We're supposed to meet for the midnight show, but I can't find him anywhere. What's your cabin number? I can help you look for him." 847, she replied, pointing to the door I'd just exited. "We're the Ashfords, Charles and Catherine Ashford. We're celebrating our anniversary. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the supernatural cold in the air. I'd just been in cabin 847. It was empty. Double quotes Mrs. Ashford. I was just in your cabin. There's no one there. Her expression changed from concern to confusion to something approaching fear. But that's impossible. Charles was getting dressed for dinner when I left. He promised he'd meet me in the ballroom. She looked around frantically. Where is the ballroom? This hallway looks different somehow. I was about to tell her that there was no ballroom on the Paradise Voyager when I realized. I could hear music coming from somewhere below us. Not the classical music that had been playing in the hallway, but big band music, the kind they used to play at fancy dance clubs decades ago. Do you hear that music? I asked. Mrs. Ashford's face lit up. Oh yes, that's where Charles must be. He loves to dance. She grabbed my arm with fingers that felt real, but somehow insubstantial. Will you help me find him? I'm terribly turned around, against every instinct screaming at me to get back to that elevator and return to familiar territory. I nodded. There was something so genuinely distressed about this woman that I couldn't bring myself to abandon her. We walked together toward what I thought was the elevator bank, but instead found ourselves in front of a grand staircase that definitely didn't exist on the real Paradise Voyager. It was magnificent. Curved mahogany banister, red carpeted steps, and crystal chandeliers that cast warm light on walls covered in oil paintings of ocean scenes. The music was louder now, coming from somewhere below. Mrs. Ashford practically floated down the stairs, and I followed, my security training warring with a growing sense that I was in far over my head. At the bottom of the stairs, we found ourselves in an enormous ballroom that occupied space that should have been passenger cabins. It was elegant beyond anything I'd ever seen. Polished marble floors, soaring ceilings painted with cherubs and clouds, and massive windows that showed an ocean view that seemed somehow different from the one I knew. The water looked darker, more mysterious, like it held secrets in its depths. The room was filled with couples dancing to music, played by a full orchestra dressed in white dinner jackets. Everyone was dressed in formal wear from what looked like the 1940s or 1950s, men in tuxedos, women in flowing gowns that sparkled under the chandelier light. But here's what made my blood run cold. I recognized some of the faces. In my years working cruise ship security, I'd seen thousands of missing person photos. Photos that get circulated when passengers disappear, when people go overboard or vanish without a trace. And scattered throughout that impossible ballroom, dancing and laughing and talking, I saw at least a dozen faces I recognized from those photos. People who had disappeared from various cruise ships over the decades. People who were supposed to be dead. Mrs. Ashford was scanning the crowd desperately. Do you see Charles? He's tall, distinguished, always wears his navy blue dinner jacket to formal events. I spotted him before she did. Charles Ashford was dancing with another woman near the orchestra, his back to us. He was exactly as Mrs. Ashford had described. Tall, distinguished, wearing a navy blue dinner jacket that looked like it belonged in a museum. There, I pointed, by the band. Mrs. Ashford's face crumpled. He's dancing with that woman again. I knew it. I knew he was seeing someone else. Before I could stop her, she walked onto the dance floor, moving through the other couples with purpose. I followed, trying to keep up, but the dancing couples seemed to close ranks around her, making it harder and harder for me to follow. By the time I reached the orchestra area, Mrs. Ashford was confronting her husband. Their conversation was heated but conducted in the polite, restrained manner of people from a more formal era. Charles, we need to talk. Catherine, not here, not in front of everyone. Then when? You keep avoiding me. You keep dancing with her. You're being ridiculous. That's when Charles turned and looked directly at me. His eyes were hollow, empty in a way that made me understand that whatever these people were, they weren't entirely human anymore. Who is this? he demanded, pointing at me. Mrs. Ashford looked confused. I'm not sure. He was helping me find you. The music stopped. Every person in that ballroom turned to stare at me. Dozens of faces from missing person reports, all looking at me with expressions that ranged from curiosity to hunger to something that might have been envy. "He doesn't belong here," said a woman in a silver dress. I recognized her from a report I'd filed just 2 months ago. Emma Rodriguez disappeared from the Carnival Destiny. "He's still alive," said a man in a white tuxedo. Another face I knew, Thomas Mueller, vanished from the Royal Caribbean Navigator 3 years ago. "He can leave," whispered a younger woman, whose name I couldn't remember, but whose face had haunted me for months. "Can he?" asked Charles Ashford, and his question sent ice through my veins. That's when I ran. I pushed through the crowd of dancing ghosts, ignoring their reaching hands and pleading voices. Some begged me to stay, to dance with them, to join their eternal party. Others seemed angry that I was disturbing their peaceful afterlife. I found the stairs and took them 3 at a time, my heart hammering in my chest. Behind me, I could hear the music starting up again, but it sounded different now, discordant, almost mournful. I reached the hallway with its strange red carpet and wrong cabin numbers. The elevator was waiting for me, doors open like an invitation. I dove inside and frantically pressed the button for deck 7, my deck. The real deck where I belonged. The elevator shuddered, swayed, and began to move. When the doors opened, I was back in the familiar blue and gold hallway of the Paradise. Voyager. My radio crackled to life with normal security chatter. My phone showed full signal. It was 3:42 a.m. I'd been gone for 25 minutes. I'd spent the rest of my shift reviewing security footage, trying to find some record of what had happened. The cameras showed me entering elevator 6 at 3:17 a.m. and then nothing for 25 minutes. The elevator appeared empty on the monitors, but I could see myself on the recordings from before and after. I was there. I entered the elevator, and 25 minutes later, I stumbled out looking like I'd seen a ghost, which I suppose I had. The next morning, I tried to research the Ashfords. After hours of digging through maritime records and newspaper archives, I found them. Charles and Catherine Ashford, married for 15 years, had been passengers aboard the cruise ship Meridian Star in 1952, on the last night of their anniversary cruise. They'd both vanished from their cabin. Their disappearance was one of several mysterious incidents that led to the Meridian Star being decommissioned and eventually scrapped. But here's the thing that still keeps me awake at night. I found records showing that parts of the Meridian Star, including elevator components and decorative elements, were sold to various shipbuilders when the vessel was scrapped. Some of those parts ended up in the Paradise Voyager. Every night when I start my shift, I watch elevator 6 on the security monitors, and every night at 3:17 a.m., it starts moving on its own. I've never gotten back on, but sometimes, when the ship is quiet and the ocean is calm, I can hear faint music coming from somewhere deep in the vessel. Big band music that plays for dancers who will never stop dancing. In a ballroom that exists between one heartbeat and the next. And I wonder if Mrs. Ashford ever found her husband. I wonder if they're still fighting about that other woman, and I wonder what would have happened if I'd stayed for just one dance. Story 4. The ship's nurse. My name is Rebecca Martinez, and I've been a registered nurse for 15 years. 8 of those years have been spent working in ship medical facilities, treating everything from seasickness to heart attacks, to the occasional broken bone from passengers who've had too much fun at the poolside bars. I thought I'd seen every possible medical emergency until I started working aboard the Infinity Seas. That's when I learned that some patients don't stay in their beds, and some don't stay alive. The medical bay on the Infinity Seas is located on deck 3, right in the heart of the ship. It's a fully equipped facility with an examination room, a small surgical suite, and 4 patient beds for overnight stays. During a typical 7-day cruise, we might see 50 to 60 patients for various minor ailments. It's usually routine, predictable work. But for my very first night shift, I knew something was different about this ship. I was reviewing patient charts around 2 a.m. when I heard someone calling for help from the patient ward. The voice was weak, elderly, definitely distressed. I grabbed my stethoscope and hurried to the back room where we keep the overnight patients. All 4 beds were empty. I checked each bed carefully, thinking maybe someone had fallen or was hiding somehow, but there was absolutely no one there. The voice had stopped, leaving only the gentle hum of the ship's engines and the soft beeping of monitoring equipment. I was about to return to my station when I noticed something odd about bed number 2. The sheets were rumpled, as if someone had been lying there, and there was a slight depression in the pillow. But I'd made all the beds myself before starting my shift, and no one had been admitted since then. I smoothed the sheets and the pillow, chalking it up to the ship's movement, creating an illusion. But as I turned to leave, I heard that voice again. Nurse, ... please, ... I can't breathe. This time I could pinpoint the source. It was coming from bed number 2, the same bed I'd just straightened. I approached slowly, my medical training warring, with a growing sense of unease. As I got closer, I could see the sheets moving slightly, as if someone was lying beneath them, struggling to breathe. The pillow showed the clear indentation of a head, and I could swear I saw wisps of gray hair against the white fabric. "Sir," I called softly, "are you all right?" The sheets stopped moving. The pillow went flat, but I could still hear labored breathing, growing more and more distressed. I reached out to pull back the covers, and my hand passed through empty air. But the breathing continued, desperate and rattling, like someone in the final stages of pneumonia. That's when I saw the chart. Hanging at the foot of bed number 2 was a patient chart that hadn't been there moments before. The handwriting was old-fashioned, done in fountain pen rather than the ballpoint pens we used. The name at the top read Harold Pemberton, age 73. The admission notes described a patient with severe respiratory distress, admitted during a transatlantic crossing for what appeared to be advanced pneumonia. The dates on the chart were from 1967, 15 years before I was even born. I grabbed the chart with shaking hands and flipped through the pages. The progression was heartbreaking. Harold Pemberton had boarded the ship in apparently good health, but developed a cough on the 3rd day. By day 5, he was struggling to breathe. By day 7, according to the final note, he had died alone in bed number 2 at 3:17 a.m. The breathing sounds stopped. I looked at my watch. 3:17 a.m. exactly. I dropped the chart and backed away from the bed, my heart racing. When I looked down at where the chart had fallen, there was nothing there, just the clean floor of the medical bay, but the depression in the pillow remained. The next night, I was determined to stay in the main office, away from the patient ward. But around 1:30 a.m., I heard different voices, multiple people this time. Coming from the examination room, there was an elderly woman complaining about chest pains, a middle-aged man describing symptoms that sounded like appendicitis, and what sounded like a child crying about a stomachache. I grabbed my medical bag and rushed to help them. The examination room was empty, but the examination table showed clear signs of recent use. The paper covering was wrinkled, and there were small tears where someone had been shifting around nervously. The blood pressure cuff was lying on the table as if it had just been used, and I could smell antiseptic in the air, much stronger than it should have been. On the counter, I found 3 patient intake forms filled out in different handwritings. The first was for Eleanor Vasquez, age 68, complaining of severe chest pain. The date was March 15, 1974. The second was for Robert Chen, age 45, with acute abdominal pain, dated September 3, 1981. The third, written in a child's careful script, was for Tommy Williams, age 8, with severe nausea and stomach cramps. The date was June 22nd, 1979. I sat down heavily, trying to process what I was seeing. 3 different patients from 3 different decades, all somehow manifesting in my medical bay on the same night. I decided to research these names when my shift ended. What I found in the ship's historical records made my blood run cold. Eleanor Vasquez had died of a massive heart attack in the ship's medical bay during a Caribbean cruise in 1974. She'd come to the medical bay complaining of chest pains, but died before the ship could reach a port with adequate cardiac facilities. Robert Chen had died during emergency surgery for a ruptured appendix in 1981. The ship's medical facilities weren't equipped for major surgery, but they'd had no choice but to try. He'd died on the operating table. Tommy Williams was the worst, an 8-year-old boy traveling with his grandparents. He'd developed what appeared to be food poisoning, but turned out to be something much more serious. A rare intestinal condition that required immediate specialized treatment. By the time they'd airlifted him to a hospital, it was too late. All 3 had died in the same medical bay where I now worked. But here's what really disturbed me. According to the records, the medical bay had been completely renovated and relocated twice since the oldest of these incidents. The current medical facility wasn't even in the same location as the original one where Eleanor Vasquez had died. Yet somehow, they'd all found their way to me. The pattern continued night after night. Different patients from different eras, all with one thing in common. They'd all died in the ship's medical facilities over the past 50 years. Some I could help, at least temporarily. I'd find myself going through the motions of taking blood pressure, administering medications that materialized from nowhere, comforting invisible patients with very real suffering. Others were beyond help, just as they'd been in life. The worst was Margaret Foster. She appeared on my 5th night, and unlike the others, I could see her clearly. Margaret was a woman in her 40s, professionally dressed, despite being in obvious distress. She materialized in the examination room, sitting on the table with perfect posture, despite the pain etched on her face. "Nurse, I think something is very wrong," she said in a voice that was crystal clear, but somehow distant, like hearing someone speak from the other end of a long tunnel. "What seems to be the problem?" "I have the most terrible headache. It started this morning, and it's getting worse by the hour. The light hurts my eyes, and my neck feels stiff." My nursing instincts kicked in immediately. Those were classic symptoms of meningitis, or possibly a brain hemorrhage. Both medical emergencies that required immediate treatment. I began my examination, and here's what still haunts me. Margaret felt real. I could take her pulse, check her reflexes, examine her eyes with a pen light. Her symptoms were consistent with what she was describing. Elevated pulse, sensitivity to light, neck stiffness that suggested meningeal irritation. "Margaret, we need to get you to a hospital immediately. These symptoms could indicate a serious condition." She looked at me with eyes full of hope and fear. "Can you help me?" The doctor said there was nothing he could do." "What doctor?" "Dr. Harrison. The ship's doctor. He examined me this morning and he said I was going to die." I felt that familiar chill. "Margaret, what year do you think this is?" 1989. "It's 1989, isn't it? We're on our way to Bermuda for our anniversary. My husband Robert and we've been married 25 years. I checked the records later. Margaret Foster, age 44, had died of bacterial meningitis aboard a cruise ship in 1989. Despite the ship's best efforts to reach medical facilities, the infection had progressed too rapidly. She died in the medical bay after 3 days of declining health. But in that moment, examining her, she was as real as any living patient I'd ever treated. And she was dying all over again. I did what I could. I started an IV, administered antibiotics, tried to make her comfortable, but I could see the life fading from her eyes, just as it must have 30 years ago. Am I going to die? She asked. I wanted to lie, to give her hope, but something in her expression told me she already knew the answer. I'm going to do everything I can to help you, I said instead. She smiled sadly. That's what the other nurse said, and the one before her, and the one before that. She reached out and touched my hand with fingers that felt increasingly cold. How many nurses have tried to save me? I realized then that Margaret had been reliving her death over and over with every new medical staff member who worked the night shift. Every nurse who'd worked this position had probably tried to treat her, tried to save her, only to watch her die again and again. How long have you been here, Margaret? I don't know. Time doesn't work the same way anymore. Sometimes it feels like yesterday. Sometimes it feels like forever. She closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, they were filled with a terrible understanding. You can see me clearly, can't you? More clearly than the others. I nodded. That means you're like us. Something happened to you, didn't it? Something that connected you to this place, to this ship. I thought about my first week aboard the Infinity Seas, before the ghostly patients started appearing. There had been an incident, a passenger, who'd suffered a heart attack during a storm. We'd worked on him for over an hour, but the seas had been too rough to helicopter him to shore. I'd performed CPR until my arms ached, tried every medication and procedure I knew, but I'd lost him. It was the first patient I'd ever lost on a cruise ship. The first time I'd felt the unique helplessness of being in the middle of the ocean, with limited resources and no way to reach advanced medical care. You felt it, didn't you? Margaret continued, as if reading my thoughts. That moment when you realized you couldn't save someone. That moment when the limitations of this place, this floating hospital, became real to you. Yes, that's when you became one of us. Not dead, not yet, but connected. You understand what it means to be trapped here with the suffering. Over the following hours, I watched Margaret die just as she had in 1989. Her fever spiked, her breathing became labored, and finally, just as the sun was coming up, she slipped away. But before she faded completely, she whispered something that I'll never forget. Take care of them. Take care of all of us. We can't rest until someone understands that we're still here, still hurting, still hoping someone can help. When my shift ended that morning, I found a note in my locker written in Margaret's handwriting. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for trying. The others are waiting for you. That was 3 months ago. Since then, I've treated dozens of patients who died in this medical bay over the decades. I've learned their names, their stories, their final moments. Some nights, the medical bay is so crowded with ghostly patients that I can barely move between them all. The strangest part is that I'm getting better at helping them, not saving them. They're beyond saving, but comforting them, easing their passage, helping them understand that they're not forgotten. And sometimes, very rarely, I can help one of them let go. When they finally accept that their time has passed, they fade away peacefully, no longer trapped in their final moments of suffering. But new ones keep arriving. Every cruise ship medical bay collects the spirits of those who died there. And I'm beginning to understand that I'm not just a nurse anymore. I'm a guardian of the dead, and they're all still waiting for someone to heal them. Story 5. The Engine. Room Mechanician Jake Morrison, and I've been working in engine rooms for 23 years. Started on cargo ships, moved to oil tankers, and for the last 8 years, I've been keeping cruise ship engines running. It's hot, loud, dangerous work that most people never think about when they're sipping cocktails on the pool deck. But I love it down there in the belly of the ship. The constant hum of machinery, the smell of diesel and hydraulic fluid, the satisfaction of keeping thousands of tons of steel moving through the water. At least, I used to love it. That was before I started working the night shift on the Serenity of the Seas. The engine room on a cruise ship is a massive space, spread across multiple levels in the lower decks. Turbines, generators, pumps, filtration systems. It's like a small industrial city buried deep in the ship's hull. During the day, it's crawling with technicians and engineers. But at night, especially during the graveyard shift from midnight to 8 a.m., it's usually just me and maybe one other guy keeping an eye on things. I'd been on the Serenity for about 2 weeks when I first noticed the sounds. Don't get me wrong, engine rooms are never quiet. There's always something running, always some piece of machinery humming or clicking or worry. You learn to tune out the normal sounds and focus on anything unusual that might indicate a problem. But what I started hearing wasn't mechanical. It was footsteps. Heavy work boots on metal grating. The same sound I made when I walked through the engine room. But I was alone down there, and the footsteps were coming from areas I wasn't in. The first few times, I assumed it was Tony, the other night shift mechanic. But when I radioed him, he was always on a different level, nowhere near where I was hearing the sounds. "You hear that?" I asked him one night when the footsteps seemed particularly loud. "Hear what?" "Those footsteps. Sounds like someone's walking around level 3. Tony was quiet for a moment. "Jake, I'm on level 5, and you're on level 2. There's nobody on level 3. I made my way up to level 3, flashlight in hand, and found it completely empty. But as I stood there listening, I could swear I heard someone breathing nearby, the heavy labored breathing of someone who'd been doing physical work. That's when I noticed the tools. Scattered on the floor near the main turbine were tools that hadn't been there an hour earlier. A wrench, some socket bits, and a screwdriver, all covered in what looked like fresh oil stains. But here's the thing, they were old tools, much older than anything in our current inventory. The wrench was a vintage Craftsman from the 1970s, and the screwdriver handle was made of wood instead of the modern polymer grips we used. I gathered up the tools and took them to Tony. "Where did you find these?" he asked, examining the old wrench. "Level 3, by the turbine." "You ever seen them before?" Tony's expression changed. He set the tools down carefully and looked at me with something that might have been concern. "Jake, how long you been working cruise ships?" 8 years. "Why? Ever lose anyone?" "I mean, anyone you worked with." "What do you mean, lose someone?" "Engine room accident. Guy gets crushed, falls into machinery, gets caught in rotating equipment. It happens more than people realize." I thought about it. In my 8 years on cruise ships, I'd been lucky. A few minor injuries, some close calls, but no fatalities. "No, nothing like that." "Why?" Tony picked up the old wrench again, turning it over in his hands. "This belonged to Miguel Santos. I'd recognize it anywhere. He carved his initials into the handle. See?" He pointed to faint letters carved into the wood handle of the screwdriver. "MS who's Miguel Santos. Was the best mechanic I ever worked with. Been on this ship for 15 years before." Tony trailed off. "Before what?" "Before he died. 3 years ago, right here in this engine room." I felt that familiar chill that had nothing to do with the ship's air conditioning. "What happened?" "Stupid accident. Miguel was working alone on the night shift, trying to fix a bearing on turbine number 2. Safety protocol says you never work on that equipment alone. But Miguel was, well, he was stubborn, thought he could handle anything." Tony set the tools down and leaned against the workbench. "They found him the next morning. Somehow got caught in the turbine assembly when it kicked back online. The whole thing was automated. Computer sensed a pressure drop and restarted the system while he was still working on it. That's horrible. Worst part is, if he'd just waited for backup or followed proper lockout procedures, he'd still be alive. But Miguel always thought he knew better." Tony looked at the old tools again. "We had a memorial service, scattered his ashes at sea. Thought that was the end of it, but it wasn't. Every mechanic who's worked the night shift since then has reported ... incidents. Tools moving around, equipment getting repaired overnight with no explanation, sounds coming from areas where no one's working. I picked up Miguel's screwdriver, feeling the smooth wood worn by years of use. You think it's him? I think Miguel loved these engines more than anything else in the world. And I think when you die doing what you love, sometimes you don't want to stop. Over the next few weeks, the incidents escalated. I'd come to work to find maintenance tasks completed that hadn't been on the schedule. Complex repairs that should have taken hours were finished overnight with tools I'd never seen before. The work was always perfect, better than perfect, actually. It was the kind of craftsmanship that came from decades of experience, but it was also impossible. The repairs were being done in areas that required multiple safety shutdowns, coordination with the bridge, and approval from the chief engineer. No one could have done this work without half the ship knowing about it. Yet every morning, I'd find evidence of Miguel's work. The first time I actually saw him, I thought I was having a heat stroke. I was working on level 4 around 3 a.m., replacing a faulty pressure sensor, when I noticed someone else in my peripheral vision. A stocky Hispanic man in coveralls was working on a pump assembly about 30 feet away. I could hear him humming while he worked, some Spanish song I didn't recognize. I assumed it was Tony, even though he was supposed to be on level 6. "Hey, Tony, what are you working on?" I called out. The humming stopped. When I looked up, no one was there, but the pump assembly was running perfectly, and there was a new gasket installed that definitely hadn't been there an hour earlier. I radioed, "Tony, you've been down to level 4 recently." "Negative. Been stuck up here with a coolant leak for the past 3 hours." "Why?" That's when I knew I wasn't losing my mind. I was sharing my workspace with a ghost. The encounters became more frequent after that. Miguel seemed to be more comfortable once he realized I could see him. He'd appear at random times, always working on something, always fixing problems before they became serious issues. I started leaving him tools, newer, better tools that might make his ghostly work easier. They'd always be gone by morning, replaced by the old ones he preferred. One night, I decided to try talking to him directly. I was working on level 3 when I heard his familiar humming coming from near the main turbine, the same turbine where he'd died. "Miguel?" I called softly. The humming stopped, but I could sense him listening. "Miguel, I know you're there. I know you're trying to help." I waited, feeling slightly ridiculous for having a conversation with empty air. Then, slowly, he materialized near the turbine. He was exactly as Tony had described. Stocky build, weathered hands, coveralls that looked like they'd seen decades of use. But there was something translucent about him, and his eyes held a depth of sadness that made my heart ache. "You can see me," he said in accented English. His voice had a hollow quality, like hearing someone speak through a long pipe. "Yes, you're Miguel Santos." He nodded. "I worked here for 15 years. These engines ... they are like my children. Why are you still here?" Miguel looked around the engine room with obvious affection. "When I died, I was angry. Angry at myself for being careless. Angry at the machines for betraying me. But mostly ... He paused, touching the turbine housing with ghostly fingers. "Mostly, I was sad to leave them. The engines, they need care, constant attention. During the day, there are many people. But at night they are alone. They get lonely, like people do." I understood then. Miguel hadn't stayed because he was trapped, or because he had unfinished business in the traditional sense. He'd stayed because he genuinely loved his work, and he couldn't bear the thought of leaving his beloved engines without proper care. "The other mechanics," I said. "You've been helping them too. Some understand, some are afraid. You ... you are different. You see the machines the way I do. You hear when they are unhappy." He was right. In my years working engine rooms, I'd developed an almost supernatural ability to diagnose problems by sound, by feel, by subtle changes in vibration patterns. It wasn't just technical knowledge, it was a kind of communion with the machinery. "Will you teach me?" I asked. Miguel smiled for the first time since I'd seen him. See, there is much to learn. For the rest of that shift, Miguel showed me things about the engines that I'd never learned in any technical manual. How to listen for bearing where before it showed up on diagnostic equipment. How to spot metal fatigue by the way light reflected off stressed surfaces. How to feel the difference between normal vibration and the subtle wrongness that preceded catastrophic failure. But most importantly, he taught me to see the engines as living things, complex organisms that needed not just maintenance, but understanding and respect. Machines have souls, he told me as the sun began to rise. Not like people, but consciousness. They know when they are loved, and they respond to that love by working harder, lasting longer. As daylight filtered down through the ventilation systems, Miguel began to fade. Will I see you again? I asked every night, if you wish. But someday, He looked sad again. Someday you will know these engines so well that you will not need me anymore, and then I can rest. That was 4 months ago. Miguel still appears most nights, though less frequently now. He's teaching me not just to be a better mechanic, but to be a guardian of the machinery, the way he was. Sometimes I catch myself humming the same Spanish songs he sings while working. Sometimes I find myself using techniques he taught me that aren't in any manual but somehow make perfect sense. The other day, the chief engineer commented that the engines had never run better, that our efficiency ratings were the highest in the fleet. I just smiled and said we'd been taking extra good care of them. But I know the truth. Miguel is still down there, still working, still loving those engines with the devotion of someone who found his life's purpose in keeping massive machinery running smoothly. And he's teaching me that work can be more than just a job. It can be a calling, a form of love that transcends even death. Sometimes, late at night when the ship is quiet and the engines are humming their mechanical lullabies, I think about what will happen when I eventually retire or transfer to another ship. Will I stay, like Miguel did? Will I become another ghost in the engine room, teaching the next generation of mechanics to listen to the heartbeat of the machines? I don't know, but I'm beginning to understand that there are worse fates than spending eternity doing work you love, surrounded by the tools and machines that gave your life meaning. Miguel found peace in purpose, even in death. Maybe that's not such a bad way to haunt a place. Story 6. The Entertainment Directorium, Sarah Chen. And for the past 6 years, I've been working as an entertainment coordinator on cruise ships. It's my job to make sure passengers have the time of their lives, organizing shows, coordinating activities, managing performers, and keeping everyone happy from the moment they board until they sadly wave goodbye. I've always prided myself on creating magical experiences for our guests. But nothing prepared me for the kind of magic I encountered aboard the Grand Celestial. It started during our Mediterranean cruise last September. We were hosting our usual variety show in the main theater, a mix of singers, dancers, comedians, and specialty acts that had been popular with audiences all season long. The show was called Timeless Classics, featuring music and performances from different eras. Everything was going perfectly until the third night. I was standing at the back of the theater, watching our headliner, Marcus Williams, perform his tribute to Frank Sinatra. The audience was loving it, 800 passengers singing along to My Way, when suddenly, Marcus stopped mid-song. He was staring at something in the upper balcony section, his face pale under the stage lights. I followed his gaze but saw nothing unusual, just rows of empty seats. The balcony had been closed for this cruise due to lower passenger numbers. Marcus tried to continue, but he kept glancing up at that same spot, clearly distracted. Finally, he stumbled through the rest of the song and quickly exited the stage. Found him in the backstage area, sitting on a crate and shaking. Marcus, what happened out there? There was someone in the balcony, a woman in a red dress, sitting in the front row. She was singing along, but I could hear her voice over everyone else's. even over the microphone. I looked at him skeptically. "Marcus, the balcony is closed. Security checked it before the show." "I know what I saw, Sarah, and I know what I heard." She had the most beautiful voice I've ever heard, professional quality. But when I tried to make eye contact with her, he shuddered. Her eyes were completely black. I assumed it was stage nerves, or maybe the heat from the lights playing tricks on his vision. Marcus had been performing on cruise ships for 12 years. He wasn't prone to hallucinations or stage fright. But the next night, during our dance review, 3 different performers reported seeing the same woman in the red dress. Always in the balcony, always in the front row, always singing along with an impossibly beautiful voice that seemed to carry above all other sounds. I decided to investigate personally. On the 4th night, I positioned myself in the lighting booth above the theater, where I had a clear view of the entire balcony section. The show was Broadway Nights, a medley of show tunes performed by our dance troupe. 20 minutes into the performance, during a rendition of Memory from Cats, I saw her. She appeared gradually, like someone slowly turning up the brightness on a photograph. A woman in an elegant red evening gown from what looked like the 1950s, sitting alone in the front row of the closed balcony section. Her dark hair was styled in perfect victory rolls, and she wore long white gloves that caught the reflected stage lights. But Marcus was right about her voice. Even from my position high above the theater, I could hear her singing along. It was hauntingly beautiful, with perfect pitch and a quality that seemed to resonate in my chest. The kind of voice that belonged in grand opera houses, not cruise ship theaters. I grabbed my radio to call security, but as soon as I looked down to find the right channel, she vanished. When I looked back up, the seat was empty. I decided to do some research. The next morning, I went to the ship's library and started digging through historical records and passenger manifests from previous cruises. What I found made my blood run cold. In 1962, the Grand Celestial, then called the Ocean Pearl, had been home to a tragic incident. A professional singer named Vivian Rosewood was performing as part of the ship's entertainment program during a transatlantic crossing. She was, by all accounts, extraordinarily talented, destined for stardom. On the last night of the cruise, Vivian was performing her final show when she collapsed on stage, mid-song. The ship's doctor determined she'd suffered a massive stroke, likely brought on by an undiagnosed brain aneurysm. She died in the ship's medical bay 3 hours later, at the age of 20-8, according to the records. Vivian's signature song was Memory, the same song during which the mysterious woman had appeared most clearly. But here's what really disturbed me. Vivian Rosewood's signature performance outfit was described in multiple newspaper accounts as an elegant red evening gown that sparkled under the stage lights. I tried to convince myself it was just coincidence, but the sightings continued. Every night during performances, especially during emotional ballads or classic songs from the 1950s and 1960s, she would appear in that same balcony seat. The performers were starting to get spooked. Our lead singer, Jennifer, refused to look at the balcony during her sets. The dance troupe complained that they could hear someone singing along who wasn't in the audience. But strangest of all, the performances themselves were getting better. I don't know how else to explain it. The same acts that had been good but not exceptional suddenly seemed elevated. Singers hit notes they'd never reached before. Dancers moved with a grace and precision that surprised even them. The shows had a magical quality that audiences couldn't stop talking about. We started getting standing ovations every night. Passenger reviews mentioned the transcendent quality of our entertainment program. Corporate headquarters wanted to know what we were doing differently. I realized that Vivian wasn't just watching the shows, she was somehow enhancing them. The breakthrough came during our 5th night, when we were performing a tribute to classic Hollywood musicals. Our soprano, Catherine, was singing Somewhere Over the Rainbow when I heard it clearly for the first time. Harmony. Vivian's voice was providing perfect harmony to Catherine's melody, adding depth and richness that transformed the song into something ethereal. The entire audience was mesmerized, many of them crying openly at the beauty of what they were hearing. But they could only hear Catherine. I seemed to be the only one who could hear both voices weaving together in perfect musical partnership. After the show, I made a decision that probably sounds crazy. I went to the theater alone and called out to Vivian directly. "I know you're here. I know you're Vivian Rosewood." The theater was dark except for a few emergency lights, creating pools of shadow that seemed to move and shift. For several minutes, nothing happened. Then, slowly, she materialized in her usual seat in the balcony. But this time, she stood up and walked to the balcony railing, looking down at me with eyes that weren't black, as Marcus had described, but filled with an infinite sadness. "You can see me," she said, and her voice carried perfectly through the theater acoustics. "Yes, you're beautiful when you sing." She smiled, and for a moment, she looked almost alive. I never got to finish my last performance. When I collapsed, there was still so much music left in me, so many songs I never got to sing. "Is that why you're here?" "Unfinished performances, partly." She moved to the balcony stairs and began descending gracefully, her red dress flowing behind her like liquid fire. "But mostly, I stay because I love it. The music, the audiences, the feeling of connecting with people through song. When I died, I thought all of that was over." She reached the main floor and walked toward the stage, her heels clicking on the theater floor in a rhythm that seemed to echo with music. But then, I discovered I could still participate. I could help other performers reach heights they never imagined. I could make the music more beautiful, more moving. "You've been helping our performers, inspiring them, guiding them, singing with them." She turned to face me, and I could see the passion burning in her ghostly features. Music is the closest thing to magic that exists in this world. It transcends death, transcends the physical. When someone sings with their whole heart, I can join my voice to theirs. The audience, they can't hear you, can they? No, but they feel me. They feel the extra emotion, the additional layers of meaning. Music speaks to the soul before it reaches the ears. Vivian walked onto the stage and stood in the center spotlight, even though the lights were off. Somehow, she seemed to glow with her own inner radiance. "There's something else," she said. "Something I need to tell someone who understands." "What is it?" "I'm not the only one." That statement sent chills down my spine. "What do you mean?" "Other ships, other venues, performers who died before their time, musicians who never got to share all the music that lived inside them. We're everywhere, trying to add our voices to the living world." She began to sing, not a song I recognized, but something that seemed to come from the depths of her soul. Her voice filled the theater with such beauty that I found myself crying without understanding why. Every theater, every concert hall, every place where music is performed with genuine passion, we gather. There, the dead who loved music more than life itself. As she sang, other figures began to appear in the theater. Ghostly musicians taking their places in the orchestra pit. Phantom dancers moving gracefully across the stage. Spectral singers joining their voices to Vivian's in a chorus that seemed to come from another realm entirely. "This is what happens when music becomes a calling instead of just a career," Vivian said, as the phantom performance continued around us. "It follows you beyond death because it was never just what you did, it was who you were." The ghostly performance was the most beautiful thing I'd ever experienced. Every note perfect, every movement graceful, every voice blending in harmonies that seemed to touch something divine. "Will you stay forever?" I asked. "As long as there are performers who need inspiration, audiences who need to feel magic. Music is eternal, and so are those who serve it faithfully." The phantom performers began to fade as dawn approached, but Vivian remained solid, real, beautiful. Tomorrow night, will you let me perform with your cast again? Of course. But Vivian, ... What if people find out? What if they get scared? She laughed, and it sounded like silver bells. They won't find out because they'll be too busy feeling joy. Real magic doesn't frighten people. It fills them with wonder. Since that night, our shows have been extraordinary. Not just good, but transcendent. Passengers talk about our entertainment program long after their cruises end. Other ships ask what our secret is. The secret is Vivian and the growing community of ghostly performers who've begun joining our shows. Each night, the phantom chorus grows larger, the music more complex, the emotional impact more profound. My performers think they're just having the best run of their careers. They don't realize they're being guided by masters who've been perfecting their craft for decades beyond death. And the audiences leave our theater changed. They've experienced something that touches their souls, something that reminds them why music matters, why art matters, why beauty is worth pursuing, even when, especially when, the world seems dark. Vivian was right. Music transcends death because it connects us to something larger than ourselves. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, the spirits of those who dedicated their lives to that connection reach across the veil to share their gifts one more time. Every night now, I stand at the back of our theater and listen to two choruses, the living performers on stage and the phantom performers who sing with them. Together, they create something impossible, something magical, something that proves that the most beautiful art comes from souls who refuse to let death silence their songs. The only question I ask myself anymore is this: when my time comes, will I love this work enough to stay? Will I become another voice in Vivian's eternal chorus? Looking at the joy on our passengers' faces every night, listening to music that touches the divine, I think I already know the answer. True Disturbing Cruise Ship Horror Stories Chapter 7. Final Story 7. The ship's captain. My name is Captain Elena Vasquez, and I've been commanding cruise ships for 18 years. In that time, I've navigated through hurricanes, medical emergencies, mechanical failures, and every kind of crisis you can imagine. I've always prided myself on being rational, pragmatic, and completely in control of my vessel and crew. But there are some things that happen at sea that can't be explained by weather reports or maritime manuals. Some things that challenge everything you think you know about the boundary between the living and the dead. This is the story of my final cruise aboard the Eternal Horizon, and why I'll never command another ship again. It was supposed to be a routine 14-day transatlantic crossing from Miami to Barcelona. We had 2,800 passengers, a crew of 1,200, and perfect weather forecasted for the entire journey. Everything that should have made for a flawless voyage. The first sign something was wrong came on our third night out, when my night watch officer, Commander Hayes, called me to the bridge at 2:47 a.m. "Captain, we have a problem with our navigation system." I joined him at the main console, where our GPS and radar displays were showing something impossible. According to our instruments, we were surrounded by other ships, dozens of them, forming a perfect circle around the Eternal Horizon. "How many vessels are we looking at?" I asked. 43 distinct contacts, Captain, but here's the thing, ... Hayes looked genuinely disturbed. "Visual confirmation shows empty ocean. Whatever these contacts are, they're not visible to the naked eye." I grabbed binoculars and scanned the horizon. Hayes was right, nothing but open water in every direction. But our radar was insistent. We were surrounded by a flotilla of ghost ships. Could it be a system malfunction? I've run full diagnostics. Twice. All systems are functioning perfectly. I tried radio contact with the phantom vessels. "Unknown vessels surrounding cruise ship Eternal Horizon. Please identify yourselves and state your intentions." The response came immediately, not over the radio, but somehow directly into my mind. Dozens of voices speaking in unison. Welcome to the crossing, Captain Vasquez. We've been waiting for you. Hayes stared at me. Captain, did you hear that? You didn't hear what? That's when I realized that whatever was happening, I was the primary point of contact. As the ship's captain, as the person ultimately responsible for every soul aboard. I was somehow attuned to these phantom vessels in a way my crew wasn't. Over the following days, the encounters escalated. Passengers began reporting strange dreams, where they met people claiming to be from other cruise ships, ships that had sailed these same routes decades ago. My crew started experiencing equipment malfunctions that fixed themselves, mysterious assistance during difficult tasks, and the constant feeling of being watched by unseen observers. But it was the children who saw them most clearly. On our 5th day at sea, I was conducting my usual evening walk through the ship when I encountered 8-year-old Tommy Martinez playing alone on deck 7. "Hello there," I said. "Are you enjoying your cruise?" "Oh yes, Captain. Especially talking to all the other kids." "Other kids?" "The ones from the other ships. There's Sarah from 1974, and Michael from 1981, and Emma from 1995. They tell me stories about their cruises." My blood went cold. "Tommy, what other ships?" He pointed out at the dark ocean. "All of them. Can't you see them, Captain? They're everywhere." I looked where he was pointing and saw nothing but empty water. But Tommy waved enthusiastically at something I couldn't see. "Sarah says her ship is the Ocean Pearl. She died when she was my age, but she's not sad about it because she gets to cruise forever now." I knelt down to Tommy's eye level. "Tommy, has anyone told you not to talk to strangers?" "But they're not strangers, Captain. They're just like me. Kids who love cruising so much they never wanted to leave." That night, I began researching the names Tommy had mentioned. Sarah Morrison, age 8, had indeed died aboard the Ocean Pearl in 1974 from complications of appendicitis. Michael Chen, age 9, had fallen overboard from the Caribbean Star in 1981. Emma Rodriguez, age 8, had succumbed to meningitis aboard the Tropical Paradise in 1995. All children who had died while cruising with their families. The pattern became clear over the next several days. Our ship was somehow serving as a gathering point for the spirits of everyone who had died aboard cruise ships over the decades. Not just passengers, but crew members, entertainers, medical staff, anyone whose final moments had been spent at sea, surrounded by the unique community that forms aboard these floating cities. They weren't malevolent. If anything, they seemed protective of our passengers and crew. Equipment that should have failed worked perfectly. Medical emergencies resolved themselves with unusual speed. Lost passengers were guided safely back to their families by invisible hands. But they were also growing stronger, more present. As we continued our voyage, on our 10th day at sea, I had a visitor in my cabin. I was reviewing weather reports around midnight when I heard a knock at my door. When I opened it, I found myself face to face with a man in a captain's uniform that looked like it belonged to the 1960s. "Captain Vasquez, may I come in?" Every instinct told me to slam the door and call security. But something in his demeanor, the way he carried himself with the familiar weight of command, the genuine concern in his eyes, made me step aside. "I'm Captain Robert Sterling," he said, settling into the chair across from my desk. "I commanded the Ocean Majesty from 1963 until 1967. The Ocean Majesty was decommissioned in 1967. Yes, I went down with her." His expression was matter-of-fact, as if discussing the weather. "Storm caught us off the coast of Newfoundland. I made sure every passenger and crew member got to the lifeboats before the ship went under. But you didn't make it to a lifeboat yourself. A captain's duty is to his ship, and everyone aboard her. I stayed to ensure the evacuation was complete." He looked around my cabin with professional interest. "These modern vessels are remarkable, so much safer than what we had in my day." "Why are you here, Captain Sterling?" to warn you, and to ask for your help." He leaned forward, his ghostly form becoming more solid, more present. Every 14 years, something happens during transatlantic crossings. The veil between our world and yours becomes thin, allowing those of us who died at sea to gather. Together, it's our one chance to reconnect with the maritime life we loved, to remember what it felt like to be part of a ship's community. Why 14 years? Ocean tides, magnetic fields, celestial alignments. I don't pretend to understand the science, but I know the pattern. Every cruise ship that makes this crossing during this specific 2-week window becomes a beacon, drawing spirits from across the Atlantic. That's why we're surrounded by phantom vessels. Exactly. Each ship represents a different tragedy, a different group of souls who found peace in the maritime life. We gather around living ships like yours to remember what it felt like to be alive, to be part of something larger than ourselves. I thought about the encounters my passengers and crew had been reporting. You're not just watching, you're participating. Captain Sterling smiled. We can't help ourselves. Put a sailor near a ship, and he wants to help with the work. Put a cruise passenger near a party, and she wants to join the fun. Death doesn't change what we love, it just changes how we express that love. What's the warning? His expression grew serious. The gathering is almost complete. By tomorrow night, every spirit who died at sea in these waters over the past century will be drawn to your ship. That's hundreds, possibly thousands of souls. Is that dangerous? Not dangerous, but overwhelming. Your passengers and crew will begin to see us clearly. Some will be frightened. Others will be so drawn to our world that they'll want to join us permanently. The implications hit me like a cold wave. You're talking about people choosing death to stay with you. It's happened before. Usually just a few individuals who were already struggling, already looking for an escape from their lives. But sometimes, he paused. Sometimes entire families decide they'd rather stay together in our world than return to whatever problems they left behind in theirs. How do I protect my people? You don't fight us, Captain. You can't fight the tide, but you can guide it. He stood up, his form becoming more translucent. Tomorrow night, at midnight, you need to make an announcement. Acknowledge our presence. Let your passengers and crew know that we're here, that we mean no harm, and that everyone has a choice to make. What choice? Whether to continue their journey with the living, or to join us in eternal sailing. But make sure they understand, once someone crosses over to our side, there's no going back. Captain Sterling was almost completely invisible now, but his voice remained clear. You're a good captain, Alina. Your people trust you. Use that trust to help them make the right decision. He vanished, leaving me alone with the weight of an impossible responsibility. The next day passed in a blur of increasingly supernatural encounters. Passengers were no longer just dreaming about meeting spirits. They were having full conversations with deceased family members, former cruise companions, and historical figures who had died at sea. My crew reported that essential ship functions were being performed by invisible helpers, and several staff members had begun talking about staying on beyond their contracted terms. As midnight approached, I made my way to the bridge and activated the ship-wide communication system. Every passenger and crew member would hear this announcement, whether they wanted to or not. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Vasquez. I need to share something with you that may sound impossible, but I ask that you listen with open minds and hearts. I took a deep breath and committed to a course of action that would either save my people or end my career. For the past week, our ship has been joined by the spirits of those who died at sea over the past century. They are not here to harm us, but to reconnect with the maritime life they loved. You may have seen them, spoken with them, or felt their presence helping you during your journey. The ship fell completely silent except for the hum of the engines. Tonight, as we reach the midpoint of our crossing, these spirits will become fully visible to everyone aboard. You will be able to see and speak with deceased family members, historical figures, and others who found their final rest in these waters. I paused, knowing that my next words would change everything. Some of you may feel drawn to join them, to continue sailing in their eternal fleet. This is a choice each person must make for themselves. But I want you to know that choosing to stay with the living is not a lesser path. Life is precious, and the people who love you in the living world need you to return to them. As I spoke, the phantom ships surrounding us began to materialize. Dozens of vessels from different eras became visible on the horizon: sailing ships, early steamers, ocean liners, and modern cruise ships. Each one glowing with ethereal light, each one carrying the spirits of those who had died at sea. If you choose to continue your journey with us, you will return home safely to your families and your lives. If you choose to join the eternal crossing, you will find peace and community with those who share your love of the sea. The spirits began boarding our ship, not forcefully or frighteningly, but like long-lost friends arriving for a reunion. Passengers who had been grieving lost loved ones were reunited with those they thought they'd never see again. Children who had died young appeared as they were, still full of joy and wonder. But Captain Sterling was right. Some of the living were tempted to stay. I watched from the bridge as families had tearful discussions about whether to remain together in the spirit realm or return to face whatever problems had driven them to take this cruise. I saw elderly passengers who were tired of fighting illness consider the peace that eternal sailing might offer. I witnessed crew members who had devoted their lives to maritime service contemplate never leaving the ships they loved. As dawn approached, the moment of choice arrived. One by one, passengers and crew members made their decisions. Most chose to continue with the living, hugging their ghostly visitors goodbye and promising to remember them always. But some, a small group of about 30 people, chose to stay with the spirits. They simply walked to the ship's rail, smiled peacefully, and stepped across an invisible threshold onto one of the phantom vessels. As they did, their physical bodies became translucent, then ghostly, then part of the eternal crew of the dead. I wanted to stop them, to convince them to stay with the living. But I understood something that I'd never grasped before. Sometimes, the most compassionate thing you can do is allow people to find peace in their own way, even if that way leads beyond the world of the living. As the phantom fleet began to fade with the sunrise, Captain Sterling appeared on my bridge one last time. You did well, Alina. You helped people make informed choices instead of being swept away by emotion or fear. Did I do the right thing, letting those people go? You gave them freedom. That's the greatest gift a captain can offer her passengers. He smiled sadly. But I'm afraid your time commanding the living is over. What do you mean? You've seen too much, Alina. You understand too much about the world beyond death. The maritime authorities will never believe your report, and you'll never be able to pretend that this voyage was routine. He was right. I could never go back to treating cruise ship command as just a job. I'd seen the truth about what happens to those who die at sea, and I could never unsee it. What will you do? Captain Sterling asked. I looked out at the ocean, which no longer seemed empty to me. I could sense the phantom vessels still out there, still sailing their eternal routes, still caring for the spirits of those who loved the sea too much to ever truly leave it. I said slowly, I'll stay close to the water, maybe buy a small boat, offer memorial services for families who have lost loved ones at sea, help people say goodbye properly. That sounds like a worthy calling for a retired captain. Captain Sterling began to fade, but before he disappeared completely, he saluted me with the respect one captain shows another. Fair winds and following seas, Captain Vasquez. Until we meet again. I completed the voyage to Barcelona, filed my report with corporate headquarters, and submitted my resignation the day we docked. As I expected, no one believed the supernatural elements of my account. They wrote it off as stress, fatigue, and the psychological pressure of command. I didn't argue. I just collected my pension and bought a small sailing vessel. Now I spend my days offering memorial services for families who have lost loved ones at sea. I help them understand that death on the ocean isn't an ending, it's a transformation into something peaceful and eternal. And sometimes, late at night, when the water is calm and the stars are bright, I can see them out there. The Phantom Fleet, still sailing, still caring for the spirits of those who found their true home on the endless sea. I know that someday, when my time comes, I'll join them. I'll take my place among the captains who chose duty over safety, who loved the ocean more than solid ground, who understood that some callings transcend the boundary between life and death. Until then, I'll keep watch on the water, helping others understand that the sea doesn't just take lives, it transforms them into something eternal and beautiful. The ocean never gives up her dead. She just gives them new ships to sail. As our journey through these disturbing cruise ship mysteries comes to an end, remember that the ocean holds secrets deeper than any of us can imagine. The next time you're standing on the deck of a cruise ship, looking out at the endless water, listen carefully. You might hear the distant sound of phantom engines, the ghostly laughter of passengers who never left, or the whispered songs of those who found their final peace beneath the waves. Sweet dreams, and may your own voyages be filled with wonder, rather than terror. Though on the ocean, sometimes they're the same thing. Until next time, keep watching the horizon. You never know what might be sailing just beyond the edge of sight.